We are living in the midst of a technological revolution. It began in the late 20th century, powered by machine intelligence, the internet, and advanced robotics.
Routine decisions is called an electronic computer.
Like the technological revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries, it promises to deliver a mixture of social stress and economic transformation. The labor market is at greatest risk of disruption, where advances in automation threaten to replace workers on an unprecedented scale. In rich world countries, this could lead to greater inequality and a further erosion of the middle class. While in emerging economies, industrialization might become more difficult. So just how disruptive will this transformation be, and how can we best adapt to its challenges? When we think of automation, we tend to think of robots replacing low-skilled workers who perform repetitive tasks. But in advanced economies like America, the computerization and automation of vast swathes of jobs is threatening different kinds of workers. David Otter is an economics professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He specializes in analyzing occupations in terms of the tasks they involve.
Information technology has been substituted strongly for workers who do what economists might call routine codifiable tasks. Tasks that can be described in terms of a set of procedures or rules that can then be carried out by a non-sentient machine. So many clerical tasks like typing and filing and sorting and calculating are now automated. Many production tasks that require repetitive motion or just limited flexibility are also now automated. And so we see a decline in employment in what many would call middle skill jobs.
Over the past 2 decades, the share of employment in mid-skilled jobs has fallen across the rich world, while high-skilled workers have benefited from greater employment opportunities.
The threat that automation creates for the labor market is not one of wealth and prosperity, it's of distribution. It's the possibility that a lot of the gains are concentrated and go to a relatively small number of actors. And what we don't want is a society that kind of ossifies because all the wealth is concentrated among a few. They can invest in their children, invest in their skills, and those kids can have, opportunity, and then everyone else is kind of shut out because if you're not born into the upper classes, you don't have the chance to advance.
Economist Carl Frey, working with his colleague Michael Osborne at Oxford University, recently analyzed over 700 different occupations in America to see how easily they could be computerized. Their study found that 47% of jobs in America are at or will be at risk of automation over the next 2 decades.
And these jobs have 3 common characteristics. They are not very intense in tasks that are associated with creativity. They are not very intense in tasks that are associated with social intelligence or social interaction. And they are not very intense in tasks that require perception and manipulation. So the manipulation of irregular objects, for example, is something where we think that human labor will still have the comparative advantage. My main concern is that in the past we've seen middle-income jobs disappearing. We're likely to need some substantial skill upgrading looking forward. So the idea that not everybody requires a university education may actually be the case in the future. We're not saying that any of these jobs will disappear. What we're simply saying is that they will be possible to automate them from a technological capabilities point of view.
Business owners have always tried to produce more while using fewer workers. Technology has just made it easier.
In 1957, we made 7,220,000 cars and trucks with a workforce of 652,000 workers. In other words, in those 10 years, we had an increase in the total production of cars of 50.5%, with only an increase of 0.5% in the labor force.
The jobs which are most likely to change in countries like America are ones that are routine, which are generally done by individuals with mid-level skills. These are people with high school diplomas or associate's or bachelor's degrees from non-competitive institutions who have tended to earn wages near the middle of the earning spectrum. A manufacturing worker on a production line whose job consists of a clear series of steps is especially vulnerable. The occupations that are threatened can also be cognitive. A bank worker whose job is a series of tasks is also at risk. Just as this revolution bears similarities to the industrial ones of the 18th and 19th centuries, mitigating some of the challenges it poses means drawing on lessons from the past.
At the turn of the 20th century, about 38% of all U.S. employment was on farms. By the turn of the 21st century, that was 2%, and has fallen since that time. It would have been extremely difficult for people at the turn of the 20th century to say, well, what would the other 36% of workers be doing 100 years later? They wouldn't have said, oh, I know, software, professional services, healthcare, tourism, right? Those industries barely existed at that time. Now, we didn't adapt to that automatically or painlessly. We adapted to it by investing in our skills. The high school movement, which sent the entire American population, young population, through high school, was basically driven by the farm states. They saw that there would not be employment on the farm, and they wanted to prepare their kids for industry, for the future. And so we've responded to our own advances by making ourselves complementary to the next set of activities in which we need to engage.
Despite fears of automation, the digital revolution does not necessarily spell the end for human workers.
Computers are very good at grinding down problems once the problem has been specified and identified, but they're not very good at putting the right questions. And that's the domain where human skill or human labor is going to be still very, very important, to actually put the right question to the computer to solve it. The human element of originality or creativity is going to be very important also in the future.
Politically challenging as it may be, governments will need to focus on making workers more productive by investing in training and infrastructure. They will also need to strengthen the safety net and raise wage subsidies for the poor if they are to ensure that the losers from technological change are not left behind.